Hi, welcome to the next section, Front End with Angular. In this section, we will focus on the client-side aspect and we'll learn how to fetch JSON objects with Angular and show the retrieved data on screen using the Angular template syntax. Now we move to the first video, Navigation Pattern. If we try to visualize all this, we can easily see that we're talking about a standard, straightforward master detail navigation pattern. When we're done, users will be able to perform a basic navigation loop, as shown. Note that we will also give the user two additional choices other than going back. Actually try the quiz by clicking on the Take It button. Change the quiz details and settings by clicking on the Edit button. We'll dedicate this section to create the main navigation interface and implementing the Go Back button, which is by far the easiest one. The other buttons will require additional effort and will be addressed later on. Our main focus now is to implement a standard master detail navigation pattern. We'll do that in 2 consecutive steps to demonstrate all the relevant Angular features better, as follows. Put together a temporary component-based master detail relationship within the same view using the Angular data binding capabilities. Improve that temporary code, replacing the single view display with an actual view-based navigation pattern with full client-side routing support. Truth be told, the former step isn't needed at all. We could just implement the latter and get the task over with. However, by choosing that quick and straight path, we would skip some really important concepts regarding Angular and its interactions with the Web API structures we just built. The first thing we need to do is to add the quiz interface to our Angular-enabled client. Wait a minute, should we really do that? Can't we just use the raw JSON data sent by the quiz controller's get and getLatest methods defined earlier, consuming them as anonymous JavaScript objects? Theoretically speaking, we can, just as much as we can output raw JSON from the controllers, instead of creating all the view model classes like we did instead. In a well-written app, though, we should always resist the temptation to handle raw JSON data and/or use anonymous objects, for a number of good reasons. We have chosen TypeScript over JavaScript because we want to work with type definitions. Anonymous objects and properties are the exact opposite. They lead to the JavaScript way of doing things, which is something we wanted to avoid in the first place. Anonymous objects and their properties are not easy to validate. We don't want our data items to be error-prone or forced to deal with missing properties or anything like that. Anonymous objects are hardly reusable and won't benefit from many Angular handy features, such as the object mapping, that will require our objects to be actual instances of an interface and/or a type. The first 2 arguments are very important, especially if we're aiming for a production-ready application. No matter how easy our development task might seem at first, we should never think that we can afford losing that level of control over our application's source code. The third reason is also crucial, as long as we want to use Angular to its full extent. If that's the case, using an undefined array of properties such as raw JSON data is basically out of the question. Now, we'll add a dedicated quiz interface to properly map our JSON serialized quiz view model server-side class. From Solution Explorer, right-click on the App folder present inside the Client App folder and create a new subfolder called Interfaces, and then right-click on it and add a new TypeScript file in there. Call it quiz.ts and fill its content with this source code. Note that we're not yet mapping all the properties present in the quiz view model class. As a general rule of thumb, we'll be keeping these classes as lightweight as possible, defining only what we know we will use for the time being. We can always add more properties later, as soon as we need them. We will now create a dedicated component that will show a list of items task on the screen. What we need now is a flexible and pluggable quiz list component that we can use once or even multiple times as separate instances within our existing app component. We plan to use this pattern throughout all our client-side development experience. Again, from Solution Explorer, navigate to Quiz folder and add a new TypeScript file call it quiz list.component, and fill it with this content. In lines 1, 2, we import the Angular references that we need. Since we're creating a component, we need the component base class. Other than that, we also import the inject decorator, which we're using within the class constructor to make the base URL parameter available through dependency injection, DI, and the HTTP client class to perform HTTP requests, also being instantiated using DI. In lines 4 to 8, we set up the component UI layout. The selector, which gives a name to the HTML pseudo element, we'll have to use to include the component within another component's template. In this case, with the given value, it will be quiz list. The template URL, pointing to a single HTML file containing the component template. The style URLs, pointing to the CSS files that will contain the component styles. The expected value is an array, meaning that we can split the component styling into multiple CSS files. Starting from line 10, we can find the QuizList component class declaration, along with all its properties, its constructor, and methods. Before adding the template and style files, there are still a couple of things in the source code that we need to look at. Let's try to shed some light on them. In the ASP.NET Core MVC with Angular template we've been using, the new HTTP client class is not enabled by default. In order to use that, we need to add its references to the Angular's app module class. Go to the app folder, open the app.module.shared file, and replace the references to the former HTTP service with the new one by importing HTTP client module, and then add it in the imports class. For the time being, our QuizList component features a single method, which is meant to be executed whenever the user selects one of the quizzes. The implementation is quite straightforward. We accept the selected quiz as a parameter, store it into a local variable, and use the standard console.log.js command to output what happened to the client console. However, we're still unable to see the code that will actually render the list of quizzes and allow the user to perform the selection. We can, however, easily guess that both of these tasks will be handled by the component's template file. From Solution Explorer, navigate to Quiz folder and add a new HTML file. Call it quizlist.component.html and replace the sample code. Among these few lines, we can see the two things we were looking for: the HTML code to render the quiz list, handled with a for cycle that will iterate through the quizzes array and create a number of li elements as soon as it is filled by the .subscribe method of HTTP client in the component class source code. The click event handler that will raise a call to the onSelect method, where the currently iterated quiz is passed as a parameter. In line 4, we added a simple logic that will decorate the li element hosting the selected quiz with the selected CSS class so that we can style it in a different way. In line 1 and line 6, we make use of the double curly braces of interpolation, an important Angular feature that allows us to insert calculated strings into the text between HTML element tags and within attribute assignments. The text between the braces is almost always the name of a component property. The whole block will be replaced with the string value of the corresponding component property. Last but not least, we need to add the CSS asset that we declared in the style URLs array within the quizlist.component TypeScript file. From Solution Explorer, right-click on the quiz folder and create a new CSS file, call it quiz-list.component.css, and replace the sample code. There's nothing fancy here, just some minimal styling to make things look less ugly. We just created our very first Angular component. However, before we can test it, we need to properly add it into our Angular application. This basically means that we'll have to reference its paths, classes, and pseudo elements to one or more already existing files, depending on the component role. In most cases, such as this one, the affected files won't be more than two: the app module and the template file of the parent component that will contain the one that we just made. In our specific scenario, we want the quiz list component to be shown as part of the home component, so we'll put it in the home.component.html template file. Open the app.module.shared.typescript file and update its contents as shown. We only added 2 lines: the import statement with a reference to the TypeScript file hosting the QuizList component class, and an actual reference to the QuizList component class in the declarations array. Now that our QuizList component is properly referenced in the app module, we can add it to the home component template file. First, we create home component HTML file. Open the home.component.html file and add these lines. That's all we need to do here. Angular and Webpack will handle the rest. Let's perform a quick test to see whether our brand new Angular component is working as expected. It's not bad at all. If we take some time playing with the new content, we can confirm that the CSS styles are also working properly, and the items being highlighted in grey when they're selected with a click. This is more than enough to tell us that everything is going well. Now we can go back to work and add the component that will allow our users to view the details of the selected quiz. Now that we know how to add a component, along with its template and style files, we can avoid explaining the most trivial steps and focus more on the code. Let's start with adding a new component inside the quiz folder. Name it quiz.component.ts. We add the code. Once done, follow up with the HTML file. We name it as quiz.component.html template file. Here, add the code. Right after that, add style sheet file and name it quiz.component.css. Our second Angular component is ready. Let's add it to our Angular app and test it. Open the app.module.shared.ts file and add the required preferences. Then open the quiz-list.component.html file and append the quiz pseudo element. In the code, we add a quiz pseudo element with a couple of Angular specific attributes that deserve some explanation. The ngIf is a condition that will hide the whole quiz element if the selected quiz value resolves to false, meaning that it's null or empty. This is a good thing because we want to render the quiz component only when the user selects a quiz from the list. The quiz attribute clearly references the @input quiz local property of the quiz component class that we just talked about. The Angular template syntax requires that the targets of a property binding must be wrapped into square brackets so that they won't be mistaken for standard HTML attributes. It's time for another test. Run the project in debug mode, wait for the home view to load, and select a quiz from the list and see what happens. If everything is working as it should, as we change the selected quiz, the bottom panel should be updated as well, showing the details of that newly selected test.